The three Zelleran students stood nervously at the edge of the Harvard University campus. Their blue skin shimmered slightly in the morning sun as they clutched their data tablets close to their chests. Zik Tra, the tallest of the group, blinked, his large golden eyes rapidly as he tried to process all the new sights and sounds. "Remember what Elder Scholar Mazrin told us," Zik Tra said to his companions. "Humans may seem strange, but we must keep open minds." Velnara nodded, her head tendrils swaying gently. "I still don't understand why the Galactic Academy sent us to study such a primitive species. Their space travel barely reaches their own moon." "That's exactly why," said Koldex, the most serious of the three. "They're new to the galactic community. We need to understand them before they join properly. The Zellerans came from a world that had known peace for over 10,000 years. Their species had evolved past violence so long ago that they studied conflict like humans might study dinosaurs, as something fascinating but extinct. The exchange program to Earth was meant to be simple. Observe human military history as an academic exercise. A woman with short gray hair and kind eyes approached them. She wore what the Zellerans had learned was casual Earth teacher clothing, a simple blue jacket and dark pants. "Welcome to Harvard. I'm Professor Susan Miller." She smiled warmly and held out her hand. The aliens had practiced this greeting and took turns shaking her hand, trying not to show discomfort at the strange custom. "We are honored by your welcome," said Zik Tra. "We look forward to learning about your military history." He said the last words carefully as if they might be rude. "Well, you're in for quite an education," Susan said. "Oh, here comes my assistant now." A tall man walked toward them with a smooth, careful gait that made all three aliens suddenly tense. He moved like nothing they had ever seen before, balanced, aware, efficient. His eyes scanned everything before settling on them. "This is Jack Peterson," Susan said, "former Marine, now working on his doctorate in historical military strategy. He'll be helping guide your studies." Jack smiled and nodded. "Nice to meet you all. I hear you're interested in how humans fight." His voice was friendly, but something about him made the aliens want to step back. "Yes, we study theoretical conflict patterns," Velnara said. "Our people have not had actual fighting for many generations." Jack's eyebrows rose. "No fighting at all? Not even sports?" "We have competition," Koldex explained, "but nothing with physical contact." "Interesting," Jack said. He looked at them like they were puzzles to solve. Susan clapped her hands together. "Well, let's get you settled in your rooms, and then we can start orientation this afternoon." Later, that day the three aliens sat in a small classroom. The walls were covered with images and maps that they didn't understand yet. Susan stood at the front while Jack leaned against the wall. "Before we begin formal classes tomorrow, I thought we could discuss what you already know about Earth's military history," Susan said. "That way I can tailor the course to fill in the gaps." The aliens looked at each other. Zik Tra spoke first. "We know humans have had conflicts. Our databases mention several large wars." Susan nodded. "Yes, we call the biggest ones world wars. There were 2 in the 20th century." "We have those records," Velnara said, tapping her tablet. "They seem very extensive for a planet with only one sentient species." Jack made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That's putting it mildly." Susan walked to a digital display and pulled up a timeline. "Earth has had over 15,000 documented wars in our recorded history." All three aliens froze. Koldex blinked rapidly. "There must be a translation error. Perhaps you mean 1/500? "No," Susan said gently. 15,000, and those are just the ones big enough to record." "That's not possible," Velnara said. She quickly calculated. "Your species would have had to be fighting constantly since you invented writing." "Pretty much," Jack said simply. The aliens stared at him in horror. "But why?" Zik Tra asked. "What could be worth so much death?" Susan sighed. "That's a complicated question that we'll explore during your time here. Resources, religion, freedom, power. Humans have fought for many reasons. And against who? Cooldex asked. You have no other sentient species on your planet. Each other, Jack said. His eyes held something the aliens couldn't read. We fight each other. There was a long silence in the room. I think, Susan said carefully, that tomorrow we should start at the beginning. The very first human weapons were simple. Rocks, sticks, things found in nature. We'll work our way up from there. That night, the three Zellerans sat in their shared living space, unable to sleep. 15,000 wars, Velnara kept saying. It must be wrong. Cooldex was checking their database. It's not wrong. If anything, it's an undercount. And look at these numbers from just their World War II. Over 70 million dead. How can they even function as a society? Ziktra wondered. How are they not extinct? Maybe that's what we're really here to learn, Cooldex said quietly. From their window, they could see Earth students walking across campus, laughing and talking. Normal people living normal lives. Did you notice something about Jack? Velnara asked suddenly. The others nodded. He moves like a predator, Ziktra said, but he seems controlled. Susan said he was a Marine. I looked it up. It's one of their warrior groups, Cooldex explained. He has actually fought in something called Afghanistan. They all looked at each other with new understanding. They weren't just studying distant history. Some of these humans had actually experienced combat. I think, Ziktra said slowly, that we have much more to learn than we realized. In the quiet night, the three aliens felt something they rarely experienced. A deep, instinctive fear. Not just of what they might learn about humans, but of what it might mean for the galaxy, if such a species ever brought their 15,000 wars to the stars. The next morning, the three Zelleran students arrived early for their first formal class. The room was different today. Glass cases lined the walls, filled with objects the aliens did not recognize. Professor Susan Miller smiled as they entered. Good morning. Today we begin with the basics of human combat history. These displays contain weapons from various time periods. Zikatra approached a case containing what looked like a metal stick with a pointed end. What is this object? That's a Roman gladius, a short sword used by their soldiers about 2,000 years ago, Susan explained. Feel free to look around before we start. The Zellerans moved slowly through the room, studying the strange items. Some were clearly designed to pierce, others to slash. Some were long metal tubes that Susan called guns and rifles. Jack Peterson entered carrying a wooden box. He nodded to the aliens and set it on the front table. When everyone was seated, Susan began her lecture. Combat has shaped human history more than perhaps any other force. These items represent different stages of that evolution. She picked up a rough stone with sharp edges. This is a hand axe, one of humanity's first purpose-made weapons. It's about 400,000 years old. Velnara's head tendrils twitched in surprise. Your species has been creating weapons for 400,000 years? At least, Susan said, though the earlier ones were primarily for hunting animals for food. She moved chronologically through the display, explaining how each weapon worked. The aliens took notes, treating the lecture like any academic subject. Then Susan picked up the short sword Ziktra had asked about. This simple Roman gladius was the primary weapon of Roman legionnaires. With this and similar weapons, they conquered most of Europe, North Africa, and parts of Asia. In one campaign in Gaul alone, over 1 million people died. The room went silent. 1 million? Cooldex said finally. With those primitive metal sticks? Jack spoke up. Efficiency doesn't always require advanced technology. Velnara pulled out her data tablet and checked the numbers against the universal database. Her blue skin paled slightly. The professor's numbers are accurate, she confirmed. To her fellow students, Susan continued through history. Longbows, crossbows, early firearms. With each weapon, she explained its tactical advantages and the approximate death toll of conflicts where it was used. By the end of the lecture, the Zellerans sat in stunned silence. Questions? Susan asked. Ziktra raised a hand. These weapons seem so simple, Yet the casualty numbers are enormous. How is this possible? Jack stepped forward. Would you like to see? An hour later, they stood in a large room filled with strange equipment. Jack explained it was a virtual reality center, where they could experience simulations of historical events. Today we'll observe the Battle of Thermopylae, Jack said as he helped the aliens put on headsets. It was fought between Greeks and Persians about 2,500 years ago. The simulation is heavily sanitized compared to reality. The world around them disappeared. Suddenly they stood on a narrow rocky path between steep cliffs and the sea. Hundreds of men with shields and spears stood in tight formation. Facing them was a much larger army. The Greeks are outnumbered at least 20 to 1, Jack's voice explained. Watch their tactics. What followed horrified the Zellerans. Greeks moved with precision, their shields forming a wall, their spears striking in unison. When men fell, others stepped forward to take their place. The ground quickly became covered in blood and bodies. Koldex pulled off his headset after only a few minutes, his breathing fast and shallow. I cannot watch more. Jack removed his own headset and nodded. That's a normal reaction. What you're seeing was actually considered honorable combat for its time. Later, when the simulation ended, they gathered in a small meeting room. All 3 aliens seemed shaken. Are you all right? Susan asked with concern. We've never seen anything like this, Sigtra admitted. In our educational system, conflict is studied as abstract numbers and movements on maps. Velnara looked directly at Jack. How can your species create such beauty, your music, your art, and also do that? Jack considered the question carefully. It's the same creativity, just applied differently. The Greek phalanx formation you saw was considered a work of genius in its time. But the purpose was death, Koldex said quietly. The purpose was survival, Jack corrected, against overwhelming odds. That evening, the 3 Zellerans sat in their shared space again, but this time they spoke little. Each was lost in thought. Finally, Sigtra broke the silence. I think we've been approaching this study all wrong. The others looked at him. We assumed humans developed weapons because they had technology, he continued. But I think it's the opposite. They developed technology because they were constantly creating better weapons. Velnara's eyes widened. You mean their entire technological development might be driven by combat, Koldex finished. It explains so much about their strange history. Their first computers were built to break enemy codes. Their space program began with missile technology. And those were just the primitive weapons from thousands of years ago, Velnara said. Tomorrow's class covers something called the World Wars. They fell silent again, each contemplating what new horrors they might learn. But mixed with their dread was something new, a growing fascination. I've been thinking about those Greek warriors, Sigtra said finally. They knew they would die, yet they fought anyway. It makes no logical sense, Koldex agreed. The rational choice would be to surrender. Unless there's something we're missing, Velnara suggested. Some element of human psychology we don't understand yet. They looked out their window at the Earth students crossing campus in the evening light. The same humans who created the unthinkable violence they had witnessed today also wrote poetry, played music, and looked at stars. I think, Sigtra said, slowly, that to understand human combat we need to understand what humans believe is worth dying for. None of them slept well that night, their dreams filled with the clash of swords and the realization that they had only begun to scratch the surface of humanity's long, bloody history. The classroom was different for the 3rd day of lessons. A large screen covered one wall, and 4 humans that the Zellerans had never seen before sat waiting for them. Professor Susan Miller waved the aliens over. Today we're starting our section on the World Wars. I'd like you to meet some students who will be working with you on a group project. The first human, a young man with dark hair and brown skin, stood and smiled. I'm Alan Garcia. My great-grandfather fought in World War II, in something called the Pacific Theater. A woman with short black hair nodded to them. Diane Wu. Both my great-grandparents escaped from Europe during the war. My grandmother still has their journals. The third human, a tall man with red hair, gave a small wave. Chris Johnson. My family has served in the military for 6 generations. I'm studying how battlefield tactics evolved during the 20th century. The Zellerans introduced themselves nervously. They had never worked closely with humans before. For the next 2 weeks, Susan explained, you'll be researching different aspects of human conflict during the World Wars. This will help you understand not just how we fought, but why. Jack Peterson started the lecture with a timeline on the large screen. The 20th century saw the most destructive conflicts in human history. World War I, from 1914 to 1918, caused about 40 million casualties. World War II, from 1939 to 1945, caused about 70 to 85 million. The numbers were so large they seemed unreal to the aliens. Velnara tried to compare them to her homeworld's population. That would be like losing everyone in our 3 largest cities, she whispered to her companions. The lecture continued with images of trenches, tanks, and planes. The technology was advancing rapidly from the simple weapons they had studied the day before. During a break, Zigtra approached the human students. May I ask a question? Why do you study these terrible events? Alan looked thoughtful. My great-grandfather never talked about the war until just before he died. Then he told stories that my family still passes down. I want to understand what he went through. For me, it's about making sure it doesn't happen again, Diane said. Those who forget history and all that. Chris had a different answer. I'm interested in how humans adapt under extreme pressure. War drives innovation like nothing else. The Zellerans were surprised by how personally connected these humans felt to events that happened long before they were born. After the break, the lecture reached a point that changed everything for the aliens. Near the end of World War II, Susan said, humans developed a new type of weapon based on splitting atoms. Zigtra raised his hand immediately. You mean theoretical radiation weapons? All advanced species have considered such technology, but no one would actually build them. The room went silent. Chris cleared his throat. We didn't just build them. We used them. Twice. The 3 Zellerans froze. They looked from face to face, waiting for someone to say this was a joke. 2 cities in Japan, Jack said quietly. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. August 1945. Kuldex's voice was barely audible. How many died? About 200,000 immediately, Susan answered. More from radiation sickness afterward. Velnara seemed unable to process this. But radiation weapons are considered too horrible to use. The Galactic treaties. We didn't have Galactic treaties. Then, Diane reminded her, we didn't even know other intelligent life existed. The rest of the day's lesson passed in a blur for the aliens. They learned about bombing raids, submarines, and massive battles across continents. But they kept returning to one thought. These humans, who smiled and joked and seemed so friendly, had used the most terrible weapons imaginable. That evening, the 6 students gathered in the university library. They had been assigned to research the D-Day invasion and prepare a presentation. Let's start with the basic facts, Alan suggested, pulling up maps and photos on a screen. As they worked, the humans casually shared stories that shocked the aliens. My grandfather landed on Omaha Beach, Chris said while organizing some data. His unit lost half its men in the first 20 minutes. Diane nodded. My grandmother used to tell me about hearing the news reports, not knowing if her brother was alive or dead for weeks. They spoke about these horrors so matter-of-factly that the Zellerans didn't know how to respond. Later that week, Professor Miller organized a field trip. The students traveled to a place called Normandy, in a country called France. They stood on a wide beach with high cliffs where weathered concrete structures still remained. This is where it happened, Jack explained as they walked along the sand. On June 6, 1944, about 156,000 Allied troops landed here. They faced heavy German defenses. Kuldex stared at the beach, then at the steep cliffs. He had been doing calculations all morning. This operation should have failed, he said finally. The defending force had every advantage: elevation, preparation, fortified positions. The statistical probability of a successful landing was less than 8.3%. Diane smiled slightly and pointed to the land behind the beach. Yet here we stand on the ground they captured. That evening, the three Zellerans sat in their hotel room. Outside, they could hear the human students laughing and talking about dinner plans. "I don't understand them," Velnara said. "Today we stood where thousands died horribly, and now they're joking about food." "I've been thinking about the numbers," Zigtra said. "The D-Day invasion, the atomic weapons, the casualty counts. None of it makes logical sense." "What do you mean?" Kuldex asked. "Logically, when faced with such terrible odds, a rational species would surrender. When developing weapons that could destroy themselves, they would stop. But humans don't." Velnara looked out the window at their human companions. "Maybe that's what makes them different. Their decisions aren't just based on logic or statistics." "Then what are they based on?" Kuldex wondered. They had no answer yet. But as they watched their human friends laughing in the same places where their ancestors had fought and died, the aliens began to understand that humanity's combat history wasn't just about technology or numbers. It was about an almost irrational determination to achieve victory against all odds. When the students returned from Normandy, their class shifted focus. Professor Miller explained that they would now study the minds of human warriors, not just their weapons and battles. "Today we have a special guest," Susan said as the aliens took their seats. "This is Dr. Kate Williams, a military psychologist who works with veterans." Dr. Williams was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a serious face. She smiled at the Zelleran students. "I understand you're studying human combat history," she said. "But to truly understand war, you must understand the people who fight in them." The aliens leaned forward, curious. This was exactly what they had been wondering about. "Humans who experience combat undergo significant psychological changes," Kate explained. "We have terms for various mental states that can result from battle." She displayed a list of words on the screen: battle fatigue, shell shock, 1,000-yard stare, combat stress, PTSD. "These are all names for the psychological wounds of war," she continued. "Just as bodies can be injured, so can minds." Velnara raised a hand. "If combat damages human minds, why do you continue to fight?" "An excellent question," Kate said. "The answer isn't simple. Sometimes humans fight because they must, to protect their homes or loved ones. Sometimes they fight for ideas, freedom, justice, their way of life." Zigtra looked confused. "But those are abstract concepts. How can they be worth physical and mental damage? To humans, ideas can be as real and important as physical things," Kate answered. "Many soldiers I work with say they weren't fighting for their country as much as for the person next to them." The concept seemed to puzzle the aliens even more. Kate continued her lecture, explaining how human brains process fear, how training helps soldiers function under extreme stress, and how the bonds between warriors can be stronger than family ties. "The brotherhood among soldiers is one of the most powerful human connections," she said. "Many veterans say no one understands them like those who fought alongside them." After lunch, an older human with white hair and deeply lined face joined the class. Kate introduced him as Frank Porter, a veteran who had fought in a conflict called Vietnam over 50 years ago. Frank spoke quietly about his experiences. He didn't talk about glory or victory. Instead, he talked about fear. Fear, so intense he couldn't move, and how he overcame it not through courage but through concern for his friends. "I wasn't brave," he told the silent room. "I was just more afraid of letting down my buddies than I was of dying." Kuldex looked puzzled. "But you killed enemy soldiers. Do you feel pride in that?" Frank shook his head slowly. "No, son. No pride. In killing. Never that. Pride in protecting my friends, yes. Pride in doing my duty, yes. But taking lives, that's something you carry forever." The Zellerans exchanged glances. On their world, the concept of taking a life was so remote it was hardly discussed outside of ancient history classes. "How do you continue living after such experiences?" Velnara asked gently. Frank smiled slightly. One day at a time, with help, by finding meaning in what happened. He looked at each alien directly. By making sure others understand what war really is, so maybe someday it won't be necessary. After class, Ziktra asked if he could speak privately with Jack. They walked across campus as evening fell. I have a question that's been bothering me, Ziktra said. Humans clearly understand the physical and mental damage that combat causes. Your medical knowledge is advanced enough to measure and document it, yet you continue to fight wars. Why? Jack was quiet for a long moment. When he answered, his voice was soft but firm. Because sometimes the things worth protecting are more important than the people doing the protecting. Ziktra stopped walking. I don't understand. I know, Jack said. It's hard to explain. Let me try this way. Would you give your life to save your entire species? Of course, Ziktra answered immediately. That's simple mathematics. One life for billions. What about to save a child you've never met? The alien hesitated. I don't know. There's no logical reason to value one unknown individual over myself, Jack nodded. That's the difference, I think. Humans are capable of valuing things beyond logic. A child we've never met, an idea like freedom, a place like home, and we're willing to suffer and die for those things, even when it doesn't make mathematical sense. Later that night, the three Zellerans met to discuss what they had learned. This concept of self-sacrifice is revolutionary, Ziktra told his companions. Our society is built on perfect utilitarian logic, the greatest good for the greatest number. But humans will sacrifice themselves for single individuals, or even for abstract concepts. It's irrational, Kuldex said, but his tone wasn't dismissive. It was wondering. I've been reviewing our historical records, Velnara said. Our species had conflicts too in our distant past. But we evolved past them by applying logical solutions, cost-benefit analyses, optimal resource distribution. Humans tried that too, Ziktra pointed out. They call it diplomacy, treaties, international law, but it doesn't always work for them. Because they value things that can't be measured, Kuldex said. How do you calculate the worth of freedom, of family, of home? They were quiet for a while, each lost in thought. I'm beginning to think, Velnara said finally, that what makes humans uniquely dangerous isn't their weapons or their aggressive tendencies. What then? Asked Kuldex. Their capacity to choose irrationality, to knowingly act against their own self-interest, to sacrifice themselves for others or for principles. Ziktra looked out the window at the night sky. A species that will die, for its beliefs cannot be controlled by threats, cannot be predicted by models, cannot be understood through pure logic. That makes them either the most frightening species in the galaxy, Kuldex said, or the most admirable, perhaps both, Velnara whispered. As they prepared for sleep, each of the aliens found themselves wondering, if humans could willingly sacrifice themselves for others, even strangers, what did that reveal about the nature of sentient life? And was the Zelleran path of perfect utilitarian logic truly the more advanced approach? Or had they lost something precious in their evolution away from conflict? The final week of the exchange program arrived quickly. The Zelleran students had learned more than they ever expected about human combat history. Now they faced their biggest challenge, presenting their findings to a panel that included military, officers, historians, and a visiting representative from the Galactic Council. Are you nervous? Alan asked as they prepared their presentation room. Ziktra adjusted the display screen with shaking hands. Very. This report will go back to our homeworld. It may affect how our people view humans. Diane smiled encouragingly. Just tell the truth about what you've learned. That's all anyone can ask. The panel members arrived and took their seats. Professor Susan Miller introduced each one. The most important was a tall, elegant alien with silver skin, Council Representative Jorex, sent specifically to hear the Zelleran findings. Susan nodded to the students. You may begin. Velnara stepped forward first. She displayed a series of graphs and statistics. When we began this study, she said, we expected to document a primitive species with limited conflict. What we found was a planet with over 15,000 recorded wars, more than any other known sentient species. There were murmurs from the human audience members. Our first reaction was horror, Velnara continued honestly. But as our research progressed, we realized something important. Humans are not uniquely violent. The capacity for violence exists in most species, including Zellerans in our distant past. She looked directly at the council representative. What makes humans exceptional is not their capacity for violence. It is how they channel, control, and ultimately transcend it. Koldex took over, showing images of human history. Not just weapons, but art, medicine, and philosophy. Throughout human history, warriors created beauty alongside weapons. Military necessity drove medical advancements that saved countless lives. The discipline of war produced the discipline of philosophy. He pointed to a timeline on the screen. Human combat evolution moved from clubs to nuclear weapons in a fraction of the time it took other species to develop comparable technology. But they also developed ethics, laws of war, and concepts of human rights at the same pace. Chris and Alan presented next, showing specific examples from the world wars. How techniques for saving wounded soldiers led to civilian emergency medicine, how code-breaking machines evolved into computers, how tactics for cooperating under extreme pressure influenced human organizational structures in peacetime. When they finished, Zigtra stepped forward for the conclusion. The room was completely silent. We came here with one question, he said. Why did humans fight so many wars? After much study, we believe we have an answer. He paused, looking at each panel member. Humans fought so many wars because they could imagine better worlds worth fighting for. Council Representative Jorex leaned forward. Explain. Unlike most species, Zigtra continued, humans have an unusual ability to imagine things that do not exist, yet. Freedom before they had it. Equality before they achieved it. Peace before they built it. They fight not just for what is, but for what could be. Jack Peterson, sitting in the back row, gave a slight nod. This imagination is their greatest strength and their greatest danger, Zigtra said. It drives them to destroy, yes, but it also drives them to create, to improve, to transcend their own nature. Velnara joined him. We believe humans are ready to join the galactic community not despite their combat history but partly because of it. They understand the cost of conflict better than species who have forgotten it. They value peace more because they know its absence. The presentation ended with images of human peacekeepers, disaster relief workers, and medical teams helping around the world. After a short deliberation, the panel gave their feedback. Most were impressed with the depth of research. Council Representative Jorex asked several pointed questions about human unpredictability and their possession of nuclear weapons. When the formal session ended, Professor Miller took the students to a quiet room to relax. There, something unexpected happened. The Zelleran students received a direct communication from their home world. On a screen appeared the face of Elder Scholar Mazrin, their teacher from the Galactic Academy. The humans politely left the room to give them privacy. My students, Mazrin said, you have done well. Thank you, Elder, they replied in unison. There is something you should know. Mazrin looked more serious than they had ever seen him. This exchange was not simply an academic exercise. The Galactic Council has been debating whether humanity is too dangerous to join our community. The three students looked at each other in shock. Your research will inform that decision, Mazrin continued. The Council feared that human combat history indicated an inherently destructive species that might bring war to the stars. They are not what we expected, Zigtra admitted. But they are not what the Council fears either. Explain, Mazrin said, using the same word Council Representative Jorex had used. For the next hour, the Zelleran students shared what they had truly learned. Not just facts and figures, but insights about human nature, their capacity for both destruction and creation, their irrational self-sacrifice, their ability to learn from their own bloody history. When they finished, Mazarin was silent for a long moment. "You have given the council much to consider," he said finally. "Return home with your full findings. Your work may change the course of galactic history." 1 year later, the first human diplomatic vessel prepared to join the Galactic Council. On board were Professor Susan Miller and Jack Peterson, selected because the Zellerans had insisted that understanding human warfare was essential to understanding human peace. As the ship lifted from Earth, Zictra watched from Harvard Yard. Had remained on Earth as its first alien resident scholar, continuing his studies of human history. A human student passing by noticed him watching the sky. "That's our first ship to the council, right? Do you think they'll accept us?" Zictra smiled. "I believe they will, but not for the reasons humans might expect." "What do you mean?" "The galaxy is full of peaceful species," Zictra explained. "But few understand the true value of peace like those who have known war. Few appreciate life like those who have faced death." The student looked thoughtful. "I never considered that our bloody history might be an advantage." "Not the blood," Zictra corrected gently, "but what you learned from it, what you built despite it, what you became because of it." As the ship disappeared from view, Zictra thought about how much his own perspective had changed. He had come to study humanity's capacity for violence, but had discovered their greater capacity for growth, adaptation, and hope. The galaxy was about to learn what the Zellerans already knew. Humanity's combat history was only the first chapter of their story, not its conclusion.